Much of what I'm going to be talking about here is colored by my experience as an editor of the Journal of Law and Economics. Of course, Ronald Coase was the second editor of the Journal of Law and Economics, and I'm conscious every day that I function as an editor of that journal, that I follow in giant footsteps. So let me start with what is the Coasean tradition. Well, at least as far as it affected his editorship of the Journal of Law and Economics, it's pretty eclectic. He was not a methodological monomaniac. He had no use for what he called blackboard economics, which was the highly abstract, mathematized modeling disconnected from real-world facts and institutions. But in fact, he championed what he called a marketplace of ideas in which competition for professional acceptance would separate the wheat from the chaff. He also placed more weight on what economists do than what they say they do. And that's the spirit in which I want to evaluate the Coasean tradition and its future. What Coase actually did as editor of the Journal of Law and Economics was to encourage empirical research across a variety of methodologies. He came into this task as the economic analysis of law and of regulation was developing rapidly. The empirical work was moving away from his preferred mode of deep study of history and institutions toward more formal analysis, statistical analysis, and tests of hypothesis, and so on and so forth. Now, Coase was skeptical about this development, but he ultimately accepted the reality, which was it was this or it was blackboard economics, and he chose this. So the question about the future of the Coasean tradition, at least as I see it as a successor editor of his, is really a question about the current state and the future prospects of empirical research in law and economics, or even applied economics more generally. And my answer to that query is mixed. I think there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that there clearly is an empirical revival in the broad industrial organization, regulation, law, and economics field. The bad news that I bring has to do with that old devil, scarcity. It's been said that all of us who do economic research have to position our work somewhere between saying perfectly nothing or saying nothing perfectly. Those are the two 0 points on the axis. So from my point of view as an editor, we're seeing more manuscripts that are closer to that latter corner about saying nothing perfectly. I think, however, that the most significant offense to the Coasean tradition in this empirical revival, which is generally favorable, the most troubling aspect or the most problematic is the downgrading of honest descriptive work. And I emphasize honest and descriptive. A statistical or historical investigation that does not pretend to identify a causal relationship, but does illuminate facts that need further exploration is what I would regard as something that's vintage Coasean tradition. And it's become harder to do that kind of thing today. So let me close with the question of what is a young economist who is interested in real-world problems to do. Well, I have four answers, four aspects of an answer. First aspect is it's not as bad as it looks, at least compared to recent history. Now, that might be a small consolation that it's not as bad as it was 20 years ago, but there is a wider professional audience for what I would like to call honest empirical work. Secondly, I'm a little bit more controversial here, I think young people should be flexible. One reason that it has gotten better is that there's increased competition for traditional economics departments. We also have outside competition. Think tanks were in Washington. They're up the block, you know, and down this block and up the next one. We have government, which is all around us. And we have a private consulting market. All of these are competition for traditional economics departments. And I think my second point would be that young economists need to be open to these alternatives. The third thing I would say is you don't think you're going to change the system. And finally, the last point that I will make is a little honesty can't hurt you. You cannot sell, ultimately, research which mainly describes some real-world phenomenon as a test of some a priori model. If you try, it's only going to generate transaction costs, and that the real Coasean tradition is that those should be minimized. Thank you very much.